Excellent.
On a cold November evening, Arthur Wellesley, 1st Duke of Wellington, stood in the complete silence of his study at Epsley House, listening to the distant murmur of the crowd in the street. On his massive oak desk lay a secret diplomatic memorandum capable of redrawing the political map of all of Europe. No servant was permitted to enter this room, hidden in the very center of his enormous house, not even to dust the bookshelves. The Duke personally turned the intricate key in the safe's lock, knowing that betrayal could come from those who served him his morning tea every day. Watch the video until the end, and you'll learn how the architecture of Victorian mansions became a tool for political survival and paranoid control. What I'm about to show you will forever change your perception of England's luxurious historic buildings. For many years, historians focused solely on the grand facades, opulent ballrooms, and rich art collections in the homes of the British aristocracy. However, real power was forged in cramped rooms, hidden from prying eyes, rooms not marked on the official floor plans for guests. We'll analyze authentic 19th century blueprints and reveal the circulation patterns that aristocrats devised to isolate their private spaces. You'll understand why the layout of an ordinary hallway cost the owner a fortune and exactly what secrets were hidden behind double oak doors. In this video, we'll take a detailed look at the layout of a Victorian mansion through the lens of off-limits areas and architectural security. We'll examine treatises by renowned architects of that era, such as Robert Kerr, who in 1864 mathematically calculated the rules for keeping servants out of sight. Our exploration will cover private studies, armories, rooms for storing letters, and secure vaults for original documents. The main protagonists will be not only the buildings themselves, but also specific historical figures whose diplomatic decisions shaped the fates of nations from within these dark rooms. Step by step, we will trace the path from the architect's drawing board to Lord Wellesley's political triumph to understand the logic of a bygone era.
Did you hear that?
What if everything you've been taught about the luxurious life of the Victorian aristocracy overlooks the key detail behind the design of these homes? In 1864, Scottish architect Robert Kerr published a seminal work titled The English Gentleman's House. This comprehensive book became a veritable Bible for wealthy landowners wishing to remodel their estates in accordance with new social demands. Kerr was the first to clearly articulate the rule of absolute invisibility, according to which servants were to move about the house completely unnoticed. To achieve this goal, the architect designed intricate labyrinths of isolated corridors, narrow staircases, and hidden passageways. The main boundary between the two worlds was the famous door lined with thick green cloth. This dense fabric excellently absorbed the sounds of footsteps, the clinking of dishes, and the muffled conversations of the maids. As soon as a footman crossed this threshold, he found himself in the strictly regulated space of the master's quarters. However, even within this privileged zone, there was a rigid hierarchy of access for the service staff. There were formal rooms that a maid could enter only early in the morning, strictly before the mansion's owners awoke. But there was a very special class of rooms whose thresholds servants were forbidden to cross under any circumstances. These isolated rooms were excluded from the daily schedule of cleaning, airing out, and the mandatory lighting of fireplaces. The owner of the mansion took full responsibility for maintaining order within these four walls. This practice stood in stark contrast to the very essence of Victorian life, in which an aristocrat was not expected to engage in physical labor. The reason for this exception was the immense value of the information stored on the shelves and in the drawers of the massive desks. In the first half of the 19th century, the nature of the British elite's wealth began to change rapidly under the influence of the Industrial Revolution, whereas high status had previously been determined by the amount of land and crop yields, shares, diplomatic agreements, and industrial patents now took center stage. Paper financial documents came to be worth far more than gold bars or heavy family silver. A leak of information about the purchase of a controlling stake in a railroad company could instantly ruin an ancient noble family. This is precisely why there arose an urgent need to create private spaces that were completely secure and impervious to prying eyes. In his designs, Robert Kerr paid special attention to the proper layout of a gentleman's private study. This room was required to have a separate exit leading to the garden or to a side terrace of the vast mansion. Such a well-thought-out layout allowed the owner to receive trusted confidants, lawyers, or political allies in secret from his own household and servants. A guest could arrive under cover of darkness, discuss important matters, and leave the estate completely unnoticed. The study became an autonomous fortress within a large and bustling house, governed by its own rules. In addition to the study, large estates were designed with another secure area for storing valuable documents. Traditionally, it was located in the oldest part of the building, which was reliably protected from fire, often in a former stone tower. It housed the originals of ancient land charters, marriage contracts, wills, and detailed family trees. Only the head of the family and his personal financial advisor had access to this stone room. Even during major renovations of the estate, hired builders were not allowed near the walls of this room without strict supervision. Kerr's architectural solutions became an accurate reflection of the deep social mistrust between the classes of Victorian England. Estate owners no longer viewed their numerous servants as loyal members of one large patriarchal family. The servants had definitively become a hired workforce, ready to sell an overheard secret to competitors or journalists. Spatial segregation became the visible, physical embodiment of this constant fear of prying ears and watchful eyes. The home ceased to be merely a comfortable dwelling, transforming into a complex mechanism of social control and economic security. The development of such enclosed spaces permanently altered the daily habits of the entire British landed aristocracy. Aristocrats were forced to teach themselves basic self-care skills within the confines of their private chambers. I'd be very interested to hear your perspective. What do you think about this level of mistrust between employers and staff in the 19th century? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Even some historians are unaware of this. Arthur Wellesley, 1st Duke of Wellington, became the most influential man in Britain after his triumphant victory at Waterloo in 1815. His London residence, the famous Epsley House, was located at No. 1 London, underscoring the owner's exalted status. As Commander-in-Chief and a prominent Conservative politician, Wellesley received dozens of secret dispatches daily from all corners of Europe. That is precisely why he deliberately turned his private study on the first floor into the most heavily guarded room in the British capital. The elderly soldier who served as the janitor could not read, which was the primary criterion for his hiring. The Duke personally inspected the room every evening before locking it with a complex double lock. No maid was permitted to even approach the hallway leading to this restricted area. If anyone in the household needed to contact Wellesley urgently, they would send a note via a special system of bells. This level of isolation allowed the Duke to maintain an absolute monopoly on political information in London. Wellesley was known for his phenomenal meticulousness in handling important government documents. His desk was equipped with numerous secret drawers, each of which was locked with a separate key. In Wellesley's study, special attention was paid to the windows, which overlooked the bustling street of Piccadilly. The Duke ordered special iron shutters to be installed, which were closed from the inside at dusk. These shutters not only protected against possible assassination attempts, but also blocked any view from the street. Late in the evening, when the Duke was working on the texts of diplomatic treaties, the light from his lamp could not be seen from outside. The room was transformed into a light-tight bunker, concealing his intense mental labor from the London crowds. Inside this bunker, Wellesley received ambassadors, ministers, and secret agents of the Crown. The meetings took place in an atmosphere of absolute secrecy, without footmen present to serve tea or port. The Duke himself poured drinks for his guests from a decanter standing on a small side table. The absence of servants during such negotiations ensured that not a single unnecessary word would leave the office. Wellesley's diplomatic victories were largely based on his ability to keep information secret until the right moment. The interior of the study stood in stark contrast to the luxurious staterooms of Epsley House on the second floor. There was no gilding, no silk wallpaper, and no expensive paintings in massive carved frames. The walls were lined with tall bookcases and wooden filing cabinets for storing rolled-up maps. Red leather briefcases lay scattered everywhere. Couriers used them to deliver government papers from Parliament. It was a purely functional space, designed exclusively for the efficient handling of documents. Wellesley understood perfectly well the psychology of the crowd and of political opponents ready to exploit any weakness. He knew that a draft letter tossed into the wastebasket could bring down the government. That is why his office had a separate cast iron fireplace, used exclusively for burning papers. The Duke personally destroyed draft contracts, reducing them to grey ash. Not a single scrap of paper bearing Wellesley's handwriting was to fall into the hands of the janitors or chimney sweeps. Wellesley was well aware that wooden walls and simple bolts could not guarantee the eternal preservation of secrets. He constantly upgraded his storage system, ordering the finest metal cabinets from London craftsmen. His obsession with secrecy reached its peak during the turbulent political crisis of 1832. But how exactly did technological progress help the aristocracy reliably protect their secrets from nosy maids? In the next chapter, you'll learn what revolutionary technology transformed ordinary doors into an impenetrable steel barrier. Guess how long it took to create the perfect mechanism for protecting the secrets of the British elite? In an era when servants were strictly forbidden from entering private offices, an ordinary door lock was no longer a reliable barrier. Simple keys were easily duplicated by skilled locksmiths who could be secretly bribed by political adversaries. The solution to this enormous problem was a unique invention by Joseph Bramer, who patented a completely new type of lock as early as 1784. This complex cylindrical mechanism with a tubular key became a true lifesaver for paranoid Victorian aristocrats. The design of Bramer's lock differed radically from anything that had previously existed on the European market. Instead of a traditional keyhole into which a lockpick could be inserted, the mechanism featured a narrow, round slot. Inside the cylinder was a series of spring-loaded plates, each with its own unique depth of engagement. To open the door, a key with precisely cut notches at the end of a metal tube was required. Only when all the notches aligned perfectly could the cylinder turn and release the heavy steel bolt. Joseph Bramer was so absolutely confident in the reliability of his invention that he issued a public challenge. He displayed his best lock in the window of a London store, promising to pay 200 guineas to anyone who could pick it. This publicity stunt caught the attention of the entire British aristocracy, which was in dire need of reliable protection for their private rooms. The lock remained uncracked for 67 years, becoming a symbol of absolute engineering security. Arthur Wellesley was one of the first to order such mechanisms installed on all the doors to his private quarters. The installation of Bramer locks transformed the very concept of access to restricted rooms in vast Victorian mansions. Now, the owner need not fear that a footman would make a cast of the key using soft wax or clay. The tubular key had a complex geometry that could not be copied without the use of precision factory equipment. Aristocrats carried these valuable keys on special gold chains, never entrusting them to their servants. Losing such a key meant having to completely break down the sturdy oak door of the study. Bramer locks were installed not only on entrance doors, but also on interior cabinets, filing cabinets, and safes. This created a multi-layered security system in which overcoming one barrier did not guarantee access to the documents. In Lord Wellesley's office, the red leather briefcases for dispatches were also equipped with miniature locks of this system. A courier would deliver the locked briefcase, and only the Duke and the Foreign Minister possessed the key. This completely ruled out the possibility of the papers being read while they were being transported through the streets. A technological breakthrough in security allowed architects to design even more complex spaces. Robert Kerr began specifying particular types of locks for different areas of the vast estate in his blueprints. Doors upholstered in green cloth were fitted with simple latches, while the study and the munitions room were equipped with Brahma mechanisms. Architecture and precision mechanics merged to create the ideal fortress for a wealthy gentleman. The house was ultimately transformed into a sector-divided system with varying levels of physical access. The reliability of the new locks gave aristocrats a false sense of complete control over the situation in their own homes. They believed that steel and complex springs could fully replace personal trust in their staff. However, no mechanism could protect against eavesdropping under the door or a chance glance through a window. Installing such systems required enormous financial investment on the part of the owners of Victorian estates. However, these expenses were considered entirely justified when it came to protecting their reputation and influence. Brahma's locks became an indispensable feature of every room to which maids and footmen were denied access. But what happened when secrecy was required, not only in politics, but also in private life? In the next chapter, you'll learn what secrets Victorian-era women hid in their boudoirs. What went on behind the closed doors of the women's quarters always remained a mystery to the architects who built these houses. In a traditional Victorian mansion, the head of the family was not the only one entitled to inviolable personal space. The lady of the house also had her own private area, to which the servants' access was strictly limited by specific rules. The central element of this female autonomy was the boudoir, a room for morning activities, reading and writing personal correspondence. Robert Kerr described the boudoir as the absolute equivalent of a man's study, requiring a similar level of privacy and quiet. In contrast to the austere men's study, the boudoir was decorated with light-colored fabrics, floral wallpaper, and elegant furniture. However, behind this light and beautiful facade lay a strict system for storing confidential family information. The secrecy of the boudoir was dictated by the strict laws of Victorian morality and rigid social conventions. A woman's reputation in high society was incredibly fragile and depended on even the slightest bit of gossip. A letter from an old admirer or a bill from a London dressmaker could cause a major family scandal. Therefore, ladies used miniature versions of Brahma locks to secure their elegant wooden boxes and writing desks. Trust in the servants in the ladies' quarters was just as low as it was in Lord Wellesley's study. Decisions that directly affected the financial well-being of the entire noble family were often made in the boudoir. The lady of the house corresponded with the stewards of distant estates and planned the budget for receptions and charity balls. It was also here that confidential conversations took place with her adult daughters about potential suitors and marriage contracts. These discussions required a space that was completely shielded from prying ears and hidden from the ever-present footmen. The layout of the Kerr house ensured that the boudoir's doors did not open onto the common corridors used by the servants. A lady's personal chambermaid, the female counterpart to a male valet, played a special role in the life of a Victorian lady. This woman enjoyed more privileges than the rest of the servants and was allowed to be in the boudoir more often than others. However, even the chambermaid was required to leave the room when her mistress opened her desk to work on her papers. The lady sealed important letters with sealing wax herself, not entrusting this task to anyone in her household. The seal bearing her personal coat of arms ensured that the letter would not be opened by servants on its way to the post office. The women's quarters were securely separated from the men's part of the house by a complex system of short corridors. The lady of the house could walk from her bedroom to her boudoir without encountering a single footman carrying a tray. This allowed her to maintain her casual morning attire away from the strict rules of Victorian etiquette. In these rooms, ladies could remove their tight corsets and take a break from the constant physical strain of social life. The boudoir was the only place where a Victorian aristocrat could allow herself to be her true self. Conflicts arising from violations of this space's boundaries occurred regularly and resulted in the dismissal of staff. If a maid was caught trying to read a note on the table in the boudoir, she was immediately thrown out onto the street. Without a good reference from her mistress, a maid would be unable to find work in other wealthy households. This strict control ensured discipline and maintained an atmosphere of secrecy around the women's quarters of the estate. The fear of dismissal worked more effectively than any complex mechanical locks or green doors. The Victorian-era boudoir debunks the stereotype of high society women as completely helpless. In these rooms, tough managerial decisions were made and complex financial budget calculations were carried out. Secrecy was necessary, not only to hide love letters, but also to protect intellectual work. Women needed these private rooms just as much as men involved in major European politics, and architects like Robert Kerr fully understood and met this need for privacy. The history of the Victorian boudoir proves that the need for personal space was universal to both sexes. Desks and boxes hidden from servants became an integral part of women's daily lives in the 19th century. But how exactly did estate owners organize their most important paper archives? If the study was the brain of a Victorian mansion, then the document room, or muniment room, was its memory. This room was designed as a completely isolated concrete or stone vault within the residential brick building. According to Robert Kerr's rules, this room was required to have thick fireproof walls and iron doors. No servant, not even the butler, was permitted to cross the threshold of this gloomy and cold vault. The document room housed the entire legal history of an ancient aristocratic family spanning several centuries. Here lay parchments bearing royal seals, confirming the family's right to own vast tracts of land. Any fire or theft of these documents could lead to lengthy legal proceedings and the loss of a fortune. For this reason, the room was often located in the basement or on the ground floor, far from kitchen stoves. The absence of fireplaces inside the vault made it damp, but protected it from accidental sparks. The estate owner rarely entered this room, and only when accompanied by his chief family attorney. They brought candles in special enclosed lanterns to minimize the risk of the dry papers catching fire. Inside, there was no luxurious furniture, only massive iron shelves and deep metal chests for parchments. Dust could accumulate here for decades, as the owner strictly forbade cleaning in this room. The air in the monument room was always stuffy, permeated with the smell of old leather and decaying paper. The cataloguing system in such rooms was understood only by the aristocrat himself and his attorney. Documents were bound with special red ribbons and placed in tin tubes to protect them from mice and dampness. If the head of the family needed to find an old marriage contract, he would spend several hours doing so in complete silence. This task was not entrusted to secretaries, as they might learn too much about the estate's actual debts. Complete isolation from the servants ensured that the family's financial problems would not become public knowledge. During the Lord's extended absence, the munitions room was sealed with a special wax seal at the junction of the doors. Upon his return, the Lord personally checked the integrity of the seal before inserting the key into the keyhole. If the seal was broken, this was cause for an immediate call to the police and an interrogation of the entire household staff. However, such incidents were extremely rare, as the servants harbored a superstitious fear of this iron door. They knew that any attempt to break into the vault could cost them not only their jobs, but also their freedom. In his book, Robert Kerr strongly recommended that architects conceal the very existence of this room. The door to the muniment room was often disguised as wooden wall paneling at the far end of the hallway. Guests at the mansion could attend balls for years without suspecting the presence of a giant safe right beneath their feet. This spatial ruse was designed to thwart potential burglars who might break into the house at night. Invisibility became the primary architectural strategy of the Victorian era for protecting legal documents. The architecture of the document room represented the culmination of the idea of spatial segregation in the 19th century English home. It was a point of absolute zero, where the authority of the servants ended and pure legal abstraction began. The document room outlived many of its owners, preserving the secrets of families even after their complete ruin. Today, these rooms are of great interest to historians studying the economy of the Victorian era. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about is that 19th century diplomacy took place in complete silence. The process of making fateful political decisions required spaces where statesmen could be absolutely candid. The private offices of men, such as Arthur Wellesley, became the arena for secret negotiations, off-limits to the press. During such meetings, a strict rule applied. No servant was to be within earshot. The rooms were soundproofed by installing double doors and thick, heavy drapes on all windows. When a foreign ambassador arrived at Epsley House for a secret meeting, the procedure for receiving him was strictly regulated. The butler met the guest at the main entrance and silently escorted him to the green cloth-covered door. There, Lord Wellesley personally took over, opening the door to his study himself and admitting the diplomat. Afterward, the door was locked from the inside with a brammer lock, cutting off the room from the rest of the residence. Servants were strictly forbidden from approaching this corridor until the guest had left the building. The absence of servants during diplomatic talks forced the aristocrats to break the customary rules of English etiquette. Wellesley himself stoked the fire to keep the room warm during long winter negotiations with allies. He personally handed out papers, unfolded maps, and searched for the necessary documents in his numerous locked drawers. This physical self-reliance was unusual for someone of his status, but it guaranteed absolute secrecy. The price of accidental eavesdropping was too high to entrust footmen with even the mundane task of serving a glass of water. It was under precisely these conditions that the terms of peace treaties, trade tariffs, and secret military alliances were discussed. The silence of the office allowed the participants to pick up on the slightest changes in the tone of voice and mood of their political opponent. In this isolated environment, diplomats could afford to make blunt remarks they would never have uttered in public. The cabinet became a psychological arena where the outcome of the negotiations depended on the parties' composure and arguments. The surrounding house, with its hundreds of servants, continued to go about its business, unaware of what was happening inside. To record the results of the negotiations, Wellesley used special ciphers that were understandable only to him and his trusted secretaries. These records were deciphered in that very same private study, without the involvement of outside clerks. The finished dispatches were placed in red diplomatic portfolios, which were sealed with the Duke's personal wax seal. The briefcase was handed directly from hand to hand to the courier, bypassing all the footmen and the butler of Epsley House. This strict protocol ruled out any possibility of information being intercepted by foreign intelligence agents within London. This style of conducting business demanded tremendous mental strain and concentration from politicians. They were constantly under a state of architectural siege, shielding their offices from the prying eyes of their own servants. The office at Epsley House became a symbol of British political power, invisible yet very real. How were these strict rules applied during times of major domestic political upheaval? The truth came to light in the spring of 1832 in London. Britain was on the brink of civil war due to disputes over the Parliamentary Reform Act, which expanded voters' rights. Arthur Wellesley, a staunch conservative, was categorically opposed to this law, viewing it as a threat to the foundations of the state. His hardline stance made him a target for the wrath of the mob, which regularly gathered outside the walls of Epsley House. During those tense days, the Duke's private study turned into a veritable besieged command post of political resistance. A mob of radicals, armed with stones, repeatedly smashed the windows on the front facade of Wellesley's luxurious London residence. However, the Duke's study, protected by heavy iron shutters, remained completely impervious to the flying cobblestones and shouts. Inside that room, Wellesley held emergency meetings with Conservative Party leaders to plan parliamentary tactics. The entrance to this corridor was blocked by armed guards, and the servants were ordered not to leave the lower floors. The Duke trusted only his old comrades in arms, with whom he had endured the hardships of the war on the continent. Fear of betrayal within the household reached an all-time high during those spring months. Wellesley suspected that radical groups might try to bribe one of the kitchen staff or maids. Therefore, fearing poisoning, he personally made his own coffee on a small spirit stove right in his study. All important documents, lists of loyal lords, and plans for troop deployment in the event of a rebellion were kept exclusively in safes. The Duke never removed the keys to the Brahma locks from his belt, not even during his brief, restless sleep on the leather sofa. The atmosphere in the off-limits room was permeated with the smell of gunpowder, as Wellesley kept loaded pistols on his desk. He was prepared to personally defend his archives should a mob break through the front doors of Epsley House. In those moments, the architectural isolation of the study, designed to shield it from the servants, became a defense against the revolution. After the crisis ended, Wellesley ordered even sturdier iron shutters to be installed on all the mansion's windows. These shutters became known in London as the Duke of Wellington's Iron Curtains, a symbol of his stubbornness and distrust. He never removed them again during his lifetime, transforming Epsley House into a gloomy and impenetrable monument to the era. The study on the ground floor became a permanent no-go zone, to which almost the entire world was barred. The Duke spent more and more time in solitude among his archive boxes, locks, and red briefcases. The crisis of 1832 showed that these off-limits rooms were not merely an architectural whim of paranoid aristocrats. They were a real tool for political survival in an era of rapid social change and instability. Architecture served as a shield behind which the old elite sought to hide from the advancing new democratic world. But how did those who were barred from behind these doors feel? What lies hidden behind the beautiful facade of submission reveals the true thoughts of Victorian domestic servants. For thousands of maids, footmen, and butlers, the existence of off-limits rooms was a daily reminder of their low social status. They polished silver, laundered the finest linens, and prepared exquisite meals, yet remained complete strangers in the house. The study door, locked with a Brahma lock, marked a clear boundary beyond which lay a zone of absolute mistrust. The servants understood perfectly well that their employers viewed them as potential thieves, spies, or dangerous traitors. This architecture of suspicion shaped a distinct psychology among the domestic staff of Victorian mansions. Servants learned to move silently, use secret staircases, and vanish when their masters appeared in the hallway. They created their own invisible subculture, hidden in the basements and attics of vast estates. Their attitude toward off-limits rooms ranged from superstitious fear to burning curiosity. However, a strict system of rules forced them to suppress this curiosity in order to keep their jobs and wages. Butlers, standing at the top of the servants' hierarchy, felt their exclusion from the family's most closely guarded secrets particularly keenly. They managed budgets comparable to those of small companies, yet were not permitted to enter the muniment room. This created tension between the master and the head servant, rooted in an unspoken struggle for control over the household. The butler knew about the wine stocks and debts owed to the butcher, but knew nothing about the mortgages on the land. This information asymmetry sustained the aristocrat's authority over the man who formerly managed his daily life. Sometimes the off-limits areas were used by servants to their own advantage, as an alibi to justify their own mistakes. If something valuable went missing, a servant might hint that it had been lost in the lord's locked study. Since the master did not allow anyone to search his private space, it was practically impossible to verify this information. Thus, the blind spot on the house's floor plan became a convenient excuse for minor domestic misunderstandings. However, serious thefts were quickly nipped in the bud, as the Brahma locking system clearly pinpointed responsibility for any break-in. The boundary of trust, built by Robert Kerr from brick and green baize, proved to be very durable. It endured for several decades, shaping the social landscape of 19th century Britain. The invisible staff meekly bypassed the locked doors, accepting the rules of the game imposed by architects and homeowners. By the end of the 19th century, the classic Victorian model of a vast estate with hundreds of invisible servants was rapidly becoming a thing of the past. The economic crisis in agriculture and the introduction of new taxes dealt a severe blow to the incomes of the ancient aristocratic families. Even dukes could no longer afford to maintain a huge staff of servants and heat dozens of isolated rooms. The British elite was forced to re-evaluate its lifestyle habits and abandon paranoid spatial segregation. Technological advances also dealt a blow to the concept of a completely isolated study. The advent of the telephone and the telegraph changed the ways in which confidential diplomatic and financial information was transmitted. Politicians no longer needed to hide behind iron shutters to secretly receive a dispatch from a courier. Information began to be transmitted over wires, and the protection of secrets shifted from the realm of architecture to that of encryption. The study with a Bramah lock lost its former strategic significance, becoming simply a quiet place for reading. The very nature of the relationship between employers and domestic staff also changed. A new generation of servants, having received a basic education, was unwilling to accept their status as invisible shadows in the corridors. The growth of factory production offered alternative jobs with regular schedules and the absence of a strict social hierarchy. The aristocracy faced a shortage of qualified servants willing to adhere to Robert Kerr's strict rules. The boundaries between the master's quarters and the servants' quarters began to gradually blur under the pressure of economic realities. The famous muniment rooms also lost their original function as impenetrable family safes. With the development of the banking system and law firms, the aristocracy began to store their securities in city vaults. Secure bank vaults in the city offered better protection against fire and theft than the basements of old country estates. The decline of the era of forbidden rooms symbolized the end of Victorian England's rigid social structure. Fear of one's own servants gave way to a pragmatic approach to managing dwindling incomes and real estate. Architecture ceased to be a tool of class segregation, giving way to ideas of comfort and the rational use of space. Recall that cold November evening in 1831, when Arthur Wellesley locked himself in his study, listening to the shouts of the radical mob. That secret memorandum, which he had hidden in a safe with a Bramah lock, was just one of thousands of documents. His entire life after Waterloo was spent in these dark rooms, protected by iron shutters and strict orders. He had built around himself a perfect architectural fortress that reliably protected his papers, but did not save him from loneliness. The Iron Duke triumphed over spies and nosy servants, but lost the battle against the passage of history itself. Over the years, the study at Epsley House became for Wellesley not only a command post, but also a self-imposed prison. He left the room less and less often, spending hours poring over old diplomatic letters and strategic reports. The silence he had so valued during negotiations now weighed heavily on him in the vast, empty house. His loyal, veteran servants were growing old and passing away, and he still categorically distrusted the new footmen. The security system he had created to shield himself from the outside world ultimately cut him off completely from society. The final destination of this great man's journey lay hidden behind those very same oak doors. He kept his political secrets, never allowing anyone to peek behind the scenes of British diplomacy in his time. The Bramah locks fulfilled their function flawlessly, preserving the Duke's archive in perfect condition for future historians. Wellesley passed away in 1852, leaving behind hundreds of locked boxes and red leather briefcases. It took decades to unpack his archive, proving that his obsession with secrecy was well-founded. The history of the forbidden rooms of the Victorian era teaches us how fear shapes the surrounding space. Architects such as Robert Kerr materialized social tension in brick, wood, and green cloth-covered doors. These houses were masterpieces of engineering designed to uphold a rigid class hierarchy and a monopoly on information. But even the thickest walls could not stop the inevitable changes in British society and political structure. The locks rusted, the secrets became history, and the invisible servants emerged from their dark corridors into the light. We see that the desire for privacy in the 19th century took the form of architectural and psychological paranoia. Arthur Wellesley's story shows that total control over personal space comes at a tremendous human cost. What do you think of the topic of Victorian architecture and the strict rules of conduct for servants in wealthy mansions? Let us know what other hidden aspects of 19th century life you'd like to learn about in our upcoming historical videos. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new in-depth investigations into the mysteries of the past.